Greetings, my fellow intellectuals and bookworms. Today we have another video for you. It'll be slightly different from normal. If you haven't noticed, I got a new phone, an iPhone 11, so if the sound quality is better at that, you'll understand. So today on Pandemic Watch, dun dun dun, cue dramatic music. Well, I'm sure all of you have heard about the new disease outbreak in China. It's a coronavirus related to SARS, which infected more than 5,000 people worldwide and killed 700 for a fatality rate of 25%. This new one is apparently different from SARS, but also 70% genetically similar. Officially, cases 3 days ago were 150, then 399 2 days ago, 599, and there's already been 25 new cases. I predicted that the number would skyrocket by at least 25. These are all possible, and at least a dozen or so have already been submitted by those health departments to do a lab sample to determine if it was spreading. And in China, not surprisingly, they covered it up. Media censorship, 75% of people in the city didn't know. They closed down the city, but at this point, it's kind of too late. They canceled all flights and trains to Wuhan, but the problem is that likely thousands of people have already moved through, and a lot of people left the city because they announced it beforehand, which is how not to fuck up 101. So 15 million people for the Chinese New Year would pass through Wuhan, and 250 million are traveling within China. Not surprisingly, there's now cases in all of China's coastal provinces and Inner Mongolia. There's very few areas that aren't affected. And there's some evidence that China's covering it up just like SARS. Unlike before, they did share a sample of the virus with the WHO for the purpose of testing for it. But the official case numbers are fishy. For one, China is almost certainly lying about this. There's a news article about how they refused to check the relatives of this family who came in contact with it. Their thinking was, if we don't test them, we won't know one way or the other, and then we can lie about our case counts. A woman died of a mysterious lung infection, and they pressured the family to cremate him. So my guess is the official cases and fatalities are definitely a lie, just like before. And it has to be pretty bad to have spread both to Shanghai and Beijing, and less than 2 days ago, a first case in Japan and a first one in South Korea, plus 4 in Vietnam, another 5 in Thailand, and 3 suspected in the Philippines. Now the problem is it's definitely getting worse. And there's been another 4 possible new ones in South Korea and 4 in Japan. On the other hand, another 8 in Thailand. But it seems like the countries with good government system, that it's spreading less well there. And the Chinese government originally said that it was spreading through animals, through a wet market, which, if you don't know what that is, it's where in China it's a traditional practice where you can buy a live animal to slaughter, and they keep them all stacked right on top of each other, different species. Now, clearly that's unsanitary for disease reasons, and clearly it should be shut down, but it's tradition, so they can't stop it. They have 2 positions: either ban it entirely, which they can't accomplish, or the second thing is they could have mandated that a fucking brick wall was placed between the animals, or at least they weren't stacked on top, although there's evidence that viruses could be spread even through that. It's surprising that, and there's already a case in the U.S., and it's kind of spreading out of control, and it's hitting right during Chinese New Year, which is fucking terrifying. Now, we've dodged a few pandemics before, and that's why this episode of Pandemic Watch, even though I'm decently convinced that this one is probably the big one, is going to be cautious. You know I like to go bold on my predictions, but I feel like we should be cautious on this. The swine flu pandemic fizzled out because it was contained to such an extent, and so few people died or infected, that the WHO got criticized by those conspiracy theorist type who thought that drug companies were forcing the WHO to declare a pandemic to sell vaccines. First of all, you're a fucking retard. Second of all, don't believe in fucking conspiracy theories. Third of all, why the fuck do you think that vaccines don't make pharmaceutical companies any goddamn money? Because they sell for so little, and the manufacturing cost eats up most of the rest. So think about it for a fucking goddamn second. Just like cancer, that there's a hidden cure for cancer. Well, why the fuck would that exist? And how the fuck would important people ever die of cancer then? They could just write it off of he mysteriously got better, or through the grace of God he lived. There are plenty of bullshit excuses like that people would buy. But no. So clearly no magic cure-all for cancer exists. And also, there are not economic motivations to continue getting people hooked on drugs forever. If anything, you could charge more than $1 million, or even more than the cost of putting someone on cancer drugs for a one-time cure, because pharmaceutical companies or insurance companies would feel required to provide it, or more or less. But that's off topic. So, we had that one fizzle out. Zika was supposed to be bad, and aside from affecting Brazil and Central America, fizzled out. The Ebola panic fizzled out, but let's be honest, Ebola is not efficient at spreading and kills people far too quickly. And we dodged SARS in 2003. So the problem is we become complacent. Yes, after 9/11, more funding was given for biodefense, a few billion, because there was real concerns about a biological terror attack on the scale of 9/11. But some of the funding, a decent chunk of the funding is still there. The problem is it's not enough, and it's split between 50 state governments, like 8 territorial governments, all the Indian health departments, and the local governments, so there's very little of it left. And some administrations have decided that a smart policy is to cut it, which is fucking retarded. If anything, it hurts national security, because it's not just military that keeps our people safe. If, for example, someone committed bioterrorism, a lot of military and also civilians would get sick and die. You can't tell me that's not national security. But since it's not something showy, and you don't have anything, flashy like a new military unit with state-of-the-art weapons, presumably it doesn't get as much public attention like the CDC or USAMRID. So, anywho, it's being penny wise but pound foolish. So, still, Operation Dark Winter, which was a classified U.S. operation to simulate a bioterror attack and see how the U.S. would respond, determined that we weren't ready. And we've done a few things since then, mainly stockpiling smallpox vaccine for a disease that doesn't exist anymore, but we fear a bioterrorist attack, and slight investments for giving companies money to develop new vaccine factories because of lead-in time. Only problem is you can't manufacture a vaccine before the pandemic. So, and a lot of that excess capacity has already been devoured. So, we're honestly not only slightly better prepared, and a lot of our preparedness has more or less been squandered by funding cuts. So, I'll be honest with you, China is definitely covering this shit up. Aside from canceling medical leave or canceling holiday leave for medical personnel in some affected cities, that's the only other thing they did, and it's fucking retarded. Alright, think of it this, it's smart on the surface, but when you think about it, how the fuck are you gonna enforce it? If all of the qualified doctors immediately flee to go visit their family on the holidays, it's going to leave less qualified first-year nursing students and nurses to deal with it. And they're not going to practice the best infection control. So people are going to get sick and people are going to fucking die. And if the doctors stay and one of them gets sick and goes home, it's a whole fuck-up waiting to happen. Even if we take a very conservative attack figure and infection number, let's say 1% out of 15 million, you end up with several 100,000 new cases. That's a shit show waiting to happen. So China should just fucking cancel the holiday season at this point. They did cancel all of the trains and planes into Wuhan, but it's a transportation hub, and people are already incubating and likely spreading it. And if I'm being honest, their fatality figures are probably deliberately understated. Same with SARS, but it's 500 miles from Shanghai, 500 from Hong Kong, and 700 from Beijing. It's a major rail hub, 11 million people. It's just fucking problematic. I mean, the US and the WHO just don't have enough information to make reasonable decisions. But decisions need to be made, and there's already a case in the US. I mean, my pandemic plan is considered unreasonably harsh. For example, after a few steps, the entire interstate highway system would be shut down. All businesses, public buildings, and such would be shut down, and the only thing that would be allowed to be open would be fire departments, police departments, and hospitals. And, for example, almost immediately after a decent-sized disease outbreak under my plan, the borders would be almost immediately shut. International flights from first the affected country would be shut. But here's what the U.S. needs to do. Shut down the borders with Mexico and Canada. The problem is if we ban all flights to and from China, someone sick could, not knowing they're sick, could fly into Toronto or Vancouver or Mexico City and drive up to the U.S., bringing it with them. So clearly closing the borders is another step. Also, banning all flights to and from China at this point is common sense. You would normally, I might advise even only shutting down for Wuhan, but it's spread beyond that point. And there's cases in other countries like Vietnam and Thailand, Japan, and South Korea. But shutting off for those people is a lot harder, if only because they're our allies. Now, so at this point, I'm only advising shutting down flights to China. One of my next steps after this, if it gets worse, is to simply ban all international flights. And then after that, domestic flights would also be canceled. Also, we should probably shut down all trade with China. Now, it seems a bit harsh, but in all honesty, there's a whole bunch of question marks. We know it's similar to SARS. We know SARS can survive on a granite countertop for a day, and there's at least some evidence that it can survive on certain items like paper or metal or plastic for 6 days plus. That could move it via air freight or, in some instances, possibly ships. And we don't want people going to fucking Walmart, touching some of their clothes made in China, and then getting sick, dying, and spreading the illness. And in public health, when you don't know, the safest answer is simply to ban it. Now, honestly, some people say, but my cheap goods. We could get cheap goods from elsewhere, and in all honesty, it's about time we stop being reliant on a horribly oppressive government that murders its own citizens, who takes the money we spend on their goods and uses it to buy weapons. But honestly, this could be the big one, if only because look at how many the officially reported cases have exploded. Now, the most common pandemic projections would have been something like new flu outbreak, a new virus, SARS reemerging, or an antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And also keep in mind that just because it doesn't have the 25% fatality rate of SARS doesn't necessarily mean it's that good. The Spanish flu, which in 1918, which killed at least 100 million based on modern estimates, only had a 2% fatality rate. But the people who got sick, a lot of them, their face turned blue. They were bleeding from the eyes, nose, mouth, and nose. They had, in the ears, when they moved, they crinkled because their lungs were so filled with fluid. And that was not a minority of people. And in this case, if we use the same number of 2% fatality rate, which is the official reported number of this disease, and in all honesty, we can't trust the Chinese government. As I said, 75% of their own people in Wuhan don't know a disease outbreak is occurring. On Weibo, Chinese Facebook, they outright banned any mention of the illness. And the majority of people don't actually trust state-run media, Which, let's be honest, who the fuck would? CCTV and Xinhua News has lied enough times to support the Communist Party that there's every reason not to trust them. I get that, and Xi Jinping said the first priority is to keep people from dying, but there's fucking no treatment, and he is unwilling to shut down the holiday to save lives. So it's clearly about preserving harmony and stability, as it goes on to say later. So it's probably going to spread unchecked, and my guess is in a week there's probably going to be at least 1,000 more cases, if not more. This might be the big one, and if we use the 2% fatality rate, a similar pandemic today would kill up to 400 million. So this is clearly going to explode. So thank you for watching. If I was better at editing, I would also give you infographics to improve my content. I'm doing better because in this, I'm increasing quality because in this case I kind of scripted out in my head beforehand. Sorry for not uploading for a while. I've just been so busy with college. I'll try to get you another video today as well, possibly a book review or another shit hits the fan situation. Like, comment, and subscribe if you've not done so. This is Sean Hartnett from Pandemic Watch. Dun, dun, dun. I feel like this could be on CNN.